whole idea behind this building a second brain philosophy is that our brains are for having ideas, not for storing them. So ideally, I should never have to remember anything, and this includes everything from names of people, birthdays, recipes, secret ingredients. A useful resource I found in an Ali Abdaal video about buying versus renting a place, some sort of calculator linked to a website, or a book or a season that someone recommended I should watch. So over the past 8 months, I have developed this system called building a second brain, and I don't have to remember anything that I have learned or come across in the last 8 months because of this system. So in this video, I will show you how all that works for me. Building a second brain is a great philosophy by Tiago Forte, but it's one of those things that was great as a blog post, but became quite full of fluff and unnecessary material when they tried turning it into a book. But if you still want to read the original blog post or the book or the audiobook, the links will still be available in the video description, but I will try to summarize it as much as possible for you. The entire second brain philosophy and the entire second brain book can actually be summarized using 2 acronyms, CODE and PARA. CODE actually is a 4-step process for creating and using your second brain, whereas PARA represents the organizational units in which your second brain will be created, stored, and all linked together. Remember, CODE is a process and PARA represents organizational units. CODE stands for Capture, Organize, Distill, and Express, and PARA represents projects, areas, resources, and archives. Talking about capture. This is the first step in your building a second brain process. So I will show you the type of information I have been capturing as a step 1 over the past 8 months. My capture process involves all sorts of information that I capture and consequently all sorts of apps that I use to capture that information. For example, to capture any shower thoughts about making a second brain video, I will use my HomePod mini in the bathroom and add a reminder or a note during the shower. For capturing any financial documents that I might need next year when I'm filing my tax return, I will simply download it into a local folder called Tax Receipts for the year 2022 or 2023. For capturing any names, important birthdays, I will simply add them to the contact card in my phone of the person that I just meet. For capturing any useful resources related to my YouTube channel, I have a dedicated place for that in my Notion. Of course, as a PhD student, I also capture a lot of notes and highlights from all the research that I read, all the system models that I make, all the related useful information that I might need for my PhD research. I also capture a lot of stuff related to home decoration and DIY projects, or my wedding related stuff, or anything and everything that I might find useful later at any point in life, like the home buying versus renting calculator that I found in an Ali Abdaal video. So that's why my capture process includes both online and offline apps. Mostly I use Apple Notes and reminders for quick thoughts and capturing quick notes offline and online, anywhere and everywhere. But they don't stay there. Later in my weekly and monthly and yearly review process, they have another place to go. So Apple Notes is basically my go-to capture for anything and everything that does not have a permanent home or a designated space for it. For storing most of my documents, I use Google Drive, but for sensitive documents, I only store them either on my local drive or on my personal cloud created using a hard drive and a Raspberry Pi by installing Nextcloud on it. Any web resources that I found go to a designated place called Resonance Inbox in my Notion database. So basically, whenever I am surfing the web and I find a important article about how to create a second brain, I have a Safari integration that lets me export that directly to my Notion with the link, with a very easy to read summary, easy to read format directly into my Notion Resonance inbox. For capturing all of my book notes and highlights, I use Readwise, but that also ultimately goes into my Notion second brain. So I have also created a template sort of for that database where the Readwise captures all of my book notes and highlights automatically, and then Readwise also automatically exports them to Notion where they are all available. For my Read Later app, I use Matter and Pocket. So Pocket is basically where I discover most of the interesting articles, but lately I've been shifting more and more to Matter. So Matter is where all of my newsletter subscriptions go. And the benefit of using Matter is that yes, I can read them, but I can also listen to them because it has a pretty decent text-to-speech engine. So if I want to highlight something from the newsletters that I'm reading, I just highlight it and it also automatically integrates with Notion and is stored in my highlights from Matter in the Notion. And when it comes to the actual podcast, I use an app called Snipped. The benefit of using that is I can create 1-minute snips from it. I can share them on Twitter. I can have an automatic text transcripts of it, so I can store them in the text format if I find some useful information, something to remember from a podcast. I never used to store any useful information from a podcast before using this app. And sometimes I also directly use Notion because I have I have 2 dedicated spaces in Notion called Quick Notes, or as I mentioned earlier, Resonance Inbox. These are the 2 places where I sometimes also capture some information directly into Notion. So that's my capture process for my second brain. Ultimately, most of the stuff, 99.99 stuff, goes into Notion. So you can say Notion is the central part of my second brain. Okay, so step 2 of the building a second brain process is organize. And here's where the projects, areas, resources, and archives really comes into play, because organize is the step where you organize all of the information that you have just captured. Here's how I do it. Before that, let me quickly explain how they are all related. So, project is basically anything that has a specific goal and a deadline. So, you're expecting a certain outcome and it has a deadline. It's not an infinite thing that will keep going on. Each project can have certain tasks. Each project can also have certain useful resources. For example, when I'm working on a YouTube video, I can have certain research notes, certain notes from a podcast, certain book that I read about it. So that will all be a resource for that project. Projects are also related to areas, and areas is something that doesn't have a deadline, at least in the near future. For example, YouTube is an area of my life. Health is another area. Home improvements is another area. So areas is something that you will possibly keep doing in the foreseeable future. Archives is something I don't really use a lot because of how good the Notion automatic organization is. But archive basically is any project, any task, any area, any resource that you're not currently actively working on. So for example, let's say you were working on a DIY project 6 months ago, but later you became uninterested in it. It's no longer an active project for you. You can move it to archive for a later use so that you have at any point a limited number of projects that you're actively working on. So let me show you what kind of projects, for example, you can have. Let's say you wanted to build a second brain template. So for that, this will be a project because you have a certain deadline and an outcome. You want to download either an existing template or you want to build it from scratch and you want to set it up. So this is a project, set up second brain for creators template. Let's see. If we open this project, here you will have certain tasks associated with it. For example, installing Chrome, Safari, Notion integration, or connecting Readwise or Matter. In my Notion template, for example, I have here how to connect to Readwise and Notion, step-by-step process. If you wanted to download this template and connect it to Readwise and Notion and set it up for yourself, this will be a project and a task, certain tasks related to that project. Other projects can be a doctor appointment, setting up some automatic sending of emails for some newsletter, another unnamed project, Thanksgiving project, new business project, new YouTube video can be a project. For each project, Tiago recommends having a project kickoff list and a project completion list. So basically, these are the steps that you should do every time you start a new project and every time you finish a new project. And I have entered them here just so I can remember them more easily every time I start or finish a project. Let's take a look at areas. For example, content creation is an important area in my life. So in that area, I have something called content calendar, and this is something where my personal system differs a little bit from Thiago's standard second brain system for creators. In my content calendar, I have these projects. These can be blog posts, Twitter threads, or videos that I'm working on, and then I have different categories for it. They all start as an idea. When I start writing about them, I move them to writing in progress. For example, if I finish writing any project, I can simply move it to ready to record. Later, they move through different stages of this pipeline until I have either scheduled or published them. My content calendar also has some templates that I have made, and in those templates I have incorporated some lessons that I learned in Ali Abdal's part-time YouTuber Academy. If you want to join that course, best course ever, I highly recommend it. I have included a link in video description if you want to check out the course. But the lessons learned from that course, the course also offers some templates, by the way. This is an improved version of this template based on my knowledge of the course as well as my knowledge of watching other hundreds of YouTube videos from other YouTube channels and everything I learned about being a YouTuber. So this includes some market research, my dream comment, what would I like it to be. These are placeholders in my template. I have some project folder templates. I have certain tips that I want to remember when I'm thinking of title ideas for my YouTube channel. I also have this length calculator. So YouTube has this thing where you should ideally keep the length of your YouTube titles under 55 characters so they don't cut off on different devices. So when I'm thinking of title ideas for my YouTube channel, I can write them here. For example, building a second brain book review. And I can immediately see what's the character length, and then I can also brainstorm what do I want to enter as a thumbnail text, and I can say I want to write second brain there in the thumbnail, or I want to put an icon of second brain in the thumbnail. So this kind of things, this gives me an easy access to whatever I am working on. Another important area of my life is goal tracking. So I have certain parts of the template where I celebrate my notable accomplishments that I got in a particular quarter. I set my goals in my weekly, monthly, and yearly reviews, and I keep track of them in one place. Another important area of my life is cooking. So I keep track of all my recipes in Notion, and I have a database where every recipe that I found on the internet, every recipe that I want to try, every recipe that someone recommended, every recipe that I love from my mother is stored in one place. Another important area of my life is health. So health related notes, any track of previous doctor appointments to know when I should book my next appointment, any test results, links to any local Drive folders or Google Drive folders where I have stored my important medical documents can also be stored and found in this centralized place in my area of life, health. The next important thing that I have is reading, and I do read a lot of books. So for that, I have a lot of integrations here. I have the Readwise integration, I have the Matter integration, and I also consider listening to podcasts as part of the reading. So I also have my Snipped integration connected to Notion in this, and I have all of my book notes in one place available here in my book notes database. You get the idea. The next organizational unit is resources. This can be resources related to a particular project. In that case, you will link it directly to that project. Or if it's a resource that's relevant for multiple projects or multiple areas at the same time, then you will link those databases together so that you have all of your resources available, linked together in a centralized place whenever you need them. The last but not the least is archives, and archives is something, as I mentioned, when you're not working on something, you can safely move it to archives, be it a task, a project, or an area of responsibility. Organize also includes my weekly review process. So I have this little reminder here to clear out my email inbox, clear out my calendar, desktop, everything. So these are little reminders that I have put as in the form of sticky notes in my template to remind me what's my weekly, monthly, and yearly process and in which order I do certain things to build repeated habits. The third step in the building a second brain process is Distill. So every time I see a note, I organize it a little bit better, or I practice what's called progressive summarization. So for example, if I read an entire book and I captured 100 highlights from it, the next time I come across them, I will highlight certain important parts out of those highlighted notes that I have captured in my Notion database. Or the time after, when I come across them, I will bold certain words, and eventually I will write a 1-line or 2-line summary of the entire book. So that's the way I was able to summarize this entire book using 2 acronyms called code and para. So when you read an entire book and you're able to summarize the entire book, you're able to remember all the lessons learned from it using 1 or 2 lines. That's when you know you're using your second brain system efficiently. You don't have to remember an entire book. 2 acronyms can give you an entire book summary. The last step in building a second brain process is express. And that's what I mean by expressing how to make a second brain system in this YouTube video. I'm basically right now expressing my knowledge and my process of how I do certain things. You don't have to be a content creator to be able to express all of the knowledge that you have gathered in your second brain system. This can be wishing someone their birthday when it's time. So your second brain should work for you to remind you when it's time to wish someone. Also, this can be sharing the useful buying versus renting, blog post guide or calculator or useful video, and you should be able to quickly remember and find it when you need it, when you're having a conversation with a friend who is now thinking about buying or keep renting a place. Your expression can also mean utilizing the information that you have gathered for yourself, for making important decisions. For example, when it's time for you to buy a certain important thing like a robot vacuum, you should have all your useful notes that you have ever gathered on robot vacuums or home improvements in one place, and then you can make an informed decision instead of having to Google everything again and again. So this basically reduces the number of times you Google information or you learn certain things. All of this information will be available in a template form. You can find the link to that in this video description. If you find it useful, if you find this channel useful, I would really appreciate if you can support the channel on Patreon. The link to that also will be available in the video description. As always, share with others whatever you learn, and see you next time.